Morning, everyone. My name's Gary, if you don't know me. Absolutely lovely to have you all here this morning. Maybe for all of us that are here, we can jump on that prayer that Roberta's just said, that something would shift and move in our lives, just in some way today. Right, folks, I'm going to get cracking on. I'll tell you what I've called my message this morning. I've called it Reading Life with the Wrong Footnotes. So I'm sure all of you have at some point picked up a book, whether it be a study book or just a novel or something, and sometimes they will have at the bottom a footnote or a reference to something. And it's not because you're not understanding the story, it's because there's some part of the behind-the-scenes story that you don't know or you're not aware of or something doesn't quite make sense. And so it will explain it so that you can understand the story better. It doesn't change the story, it just gives better understanding. So all of us have footnotes in our lives. They are the understanding that we have built up in our own heads and minds as to what life is about and how to make life work. And those are the things we often default to try and deal with life. Of course, the problem would be is if our footnotes are wrong. If that approach or that understanding of life is flawed, then we will respond wrongly, think wrongly, and we will miss the opportunities for our own personal growth and advancement in life if those footnotes are wrong. So it is quite a challenge, and today I'm hoping, through what I'm going to talk about today, to try and fix some of the footnotes in our lives so that we can respond right, seize the opportunities that come our way in life, and achieve significant personal growth in our lives. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be going to a story in the Old Testament which is just extremely challenging, and I'm not pretending that it's going to be an easy one to grasp or to accept, but it is very challenging, and it's very important that we get a handle on that story. But before we do, I need to set the right kind of stage for the story and for this discussion. So I just want to talk about you and me first this morning to get the stage right. We all come on a Sunday, and to be honest, most of us look pretty normal. True? We look pretty normal. But if all of us had to stand up here and give a very honest reflection of our life story, it would soon become apparent that normal is just a setting on a hairdryer, okay? That normal doesn't really exist for you and I. That our life story is one of a whole lot of varied events, some significant success, decisions and choices we made which were right, which can help us hold our head up high. Other times we made wrong choices, we failed, we have regrets, struggles with our own sinfulness, which all of us have. We all are afflicted by sinfulness in our nature, and we struggle with that, and we sin. And add into all that story those painful moments in our lives when terrible things have happened to us, and we've been wounded and damaged. Now that would be an honest reflection on each of us. That's what we would look like if we showed a story. I do believe with all my heart that if you met somebody who didn't give that impression, it's likely they're not being honest with themselves or with you if they give the impression that they are normal. And so I think personally in the church, it's very important that we dispel that myth. Very important. None of us are whole. None of us have got it together. Right? That's the level playing field we're on. We're all actually a product of our entire past. Our upbringing, the environments we were raised in, the things that happened to us, our choices. And sometimes for you and I, the way we respond to situations and circumstances in life is still being triggered by things of the past. And very often those past experiences, particularly the painful ones, shape the way we think, they shape our beliefs, and they can cause us to respond to things in life in a very faulty way because of that pain that is still there. And if you add to that drama of our lives the fact that modern philosophy ignores the fact that we are spiritual beings at our core, most of their attempts to help us proves unsatisfactory and provides temporary benefit at best. And I believe with all my heart and soul, like many of the songs we've sung today, we are spiritual beings. We need spiritual solutions, and that's where God and faith and the Bible come into our lives. Without that, we are the vagabond on the lost road going nowhere. We need spiritual answers for spiritual people. And thankfully, as Roberta shared, we have a God who loves us passionately, who sees us, who pursues us, and like that vagabond we sung about, wants to rescue us and bring us into a place of freedom. That is his heart for you and I. So wherever you might be, whatever damage you have in your life, whatever afflictions you've faced, however faulty you may be, rest assured, as Roberta said, God loves you deeply and desperately and longs for you to find freedom in your life. And in saying that, I'm pointing the finger at me, right? Me too, all of us. So that's the stage we're setting for today. So what we're going to do is we're going to jump into a story just like that. But it's given in the Bible as an illustration of the journey you and I must take. And it's the story of Israel. Israel found themselves living in Egypt for 400 years, by which time, at the end of that 400-year period, they had become enslaved. They were oppressed, enslaved. The things that were happening to them were traumatizing. And it was in that place of terrible sorrow and grief and suffering they cried out to God. And if you read the story, God made some incredible promises. He said, I'm coming to rescue you. I'm going to come and redeem you. I am going to take you away from the oppression of the Egyptians. I'm going to free you from their control. I'm going to take you to a brand new life where you can live a life of freedom. Exactly what Roberta shared. That's God's heart for you and I. But that journey to freedom did not come easy for those people, and it will not come easy for you and I. It's possible, but it's not easy. And there were various events that happened along their journey which are critical for you and I to read how they responded, learn from that, and figure it out for our own lives. I'm so gripped by their story. I've longed to do a whole series, and maybe I will one day, through their whole life story to see what we can learn. But for today, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be going to one event. We're going to have a look at that event, and we are going to see that there are 4 parts to the story. 2 parts that deal with Israel and 2 parts that deal with us, okay? And it's very important, this story, folks. You may not initially figure it out because there's no footnotes initially. That's the problem, there's no footnotes. But we'll get them, and then we'll work it out. All right. So we're going to a story in Numbers, and basically just to give you a thumbs up as to what's happened, folks, Israel, there's about 1 million of them, and they've got to get from Egypt to this land of promise, and they have to bypass through several kingdoms and people groups and nationalities and stuff. And up until this point, they had sent envoys to these kingdoms saying, hey, we're not here to cause trouble. We do need water along the road. See if we can just help ourselves to water. We'll pay you for it. We're not here to cause trouble. Can you please let us just pass on the highway? We just want to go past. We won't cause trouble. And they'd said yes, and they gave them this free passage until this event. Now have a look. Numbers 21. We're only going to read 3 verses, and it's not difficult to get our head around. So repeating the same process, Israel sent messengers to say to Sihon, king of the Amorites, "Let us pass through your country. We will not turn aside into any field or vineyard or drink water from any well. We'll travel along the king's highway until we have passed through your territory." Polite, respectful, honorable, full of integrity. But Sihon would not let Israel pass through its territory. He mustered his entire army and marched out into the wilderness against Israel. When he reached Jahaz, he fought with Israel. Israel, however, put him to the sword and took over his land. So there was a good outcome. Right, let's just pause. Let's just look at the story in the natural. You have on one hand a group of people full of integrity and uprightness and wholesomeness. What would you call the other crowd? Aggressors? None of that was justifiable, what they did. They could have avoided that had they not been an aggressor. Israel was minding their own business, trying to do things the right way. The attack on them was totally unprovoked. How many of you know in history situations like that where attacks have been completely unprovoked, right? What does that do inside of you when you suffer an injustice through some undefendable? Is that the right word? Okay, scrap the whole sentence. I'll just start again. What do you do when someone is an aggressor towards you in a way that you didn't deserve? You get riled. What would you have said if that was you? For goodness sake, this is on them, their fault. They caused that. Totally unfair. Why do these things happen when we're trying to do what's right? God, for goodness sake, we're trusting you. Why you bring these hassles our way? This is completely avoidable. It shouldn't have happened. Most of us live in Numbers chapter 21, verse 21 to 24. Things happen to us that we feel are completely unfair, and we respond in a natural way towards them. It may be that for some of you here today, you really identify with that. And that in your heart you have lingering resentment, anger, criticism, bitterness towards people or events or circumstances that have come your way in your life. I get that totally. We all would. However, the problem with that story was we didn't have the footnotes. And they didn't have the footnotes. And what you find is years later, after they've progressed through their story and they've come to the promised land and they're about to go in, Moses recounts those events and retells them. And on that occasion, which they didn't have before, he provides the footnote, which explains the circumstance. So this is the second part of the story. We're now going to have a look at the divine footnote. Okay. Have a look at this. Deuteronomy 2, verse 30, talking about this event. So Moses stands up and says, "But Sihon, king of Heshbon, refused to let us pass through because of this reason. For the Lord your God had made his spirit stubborn and his heart obstinate in order to give him into your hands, as he has now done." Pause. Just breathe for a moment and let that sink in. What looked to them like an unprovoked aggression was something sent by God for them, for a reason. They thought they were being attacked. They thought they were victims of someone else's aggression. But God was drawing out an enemy which for their future they needed to face and deal with. Now you think about that, folks. What would have been the consequence if that enemy had not been drawn out, faced and defeated? It would have still been there to harass them for the future. So from God's perspective, he knew that if they didn't face him and deal with him, he would have been a thorn in their side for the rest of their lives. It had to be faced and dealt with. So he allowed that enemy to come to them with this provoked aggression. So folks, do you know what? There's a key principle there for you and I. We have already heard from Roberta's story. We've already sung these songs. We've already spoken about how God's heart for us is to find freedom. God longs for you and I to find freedom. But to do that, he has to bring out into the open and get us to confront the things we need to face and deal with. So God allows circumstances in our lives to come our way to get us to face things. And that radically changes our footnotes on how we deal with life. Folks, do you know what part of the problem is for a lot of us? And I don't know how many of you have been there. When we've been hurt in life, disappointed, damaged in some way, growing up in a society like ours, generally the only answer we have to those things is to bury these things as much as we possibly can and not face them and not deal with them. How many of you have been down that road? Burying things, not facing things, just hoping they never surface. But the problem is we're never free then. Because what happens is pressure always brings those things to the surface. Whenever you're under pressure, anything undealt with in your life, any damage in your soul will come to the surface. And when that does, we have to exert all this massive amount of energy to suppress it and cork it down again. So we spend our lives spending this energy trying to suppress these things, which we don't want to face or deal with. We're not free. We're bound, chained. So God in his love and mercy provides the pressure to bring these things out into the surface, to say, now face them, deal with them. Now, folks, I'm the first one to admit that is not easy, okay? It's not an easy thing to do. And the only way we will ever do that is in a place of love and safety, okay? The only way we'll ever allow those things to come up and say, okay, I'll face this, is if we're in an environment of love and safety. And of course, God is that love and safety, and we should be that to one another. But I want to move on now from that story to the next two parts, which deal with you and me. Okay, how do we apply that shift in the footnotes to our lives? Well, I think we need to ask a bunch of questions, okay? Things like, what if some of the circumstances that have come my way are not just random, but sent by God to encourage me to face things in my life? What if, in fact, I'm not a victim of someone else's problem? What if some of my issues can't be healed by comfort, that will never surface unless there's pressure, and they won't reveal themselves without some measure of confrontation? What if the real issue is not what is happening to me, but how am I responding to these things that are happening to me? Maybe that is the real issue that we have to look at. How am I responding? And you know, folks, I think this is a very difficult thing to say and to put into practice, but this is what I deeply believe. If you and I ever hope to find freedom in our lives, the starting point has to be this question: What are those circumstances triggering in me? What is it revealing about me? Not the other person, me. What behavior is it triggering in me that I keep doing that behavior over and over and over again? Not finger pointing at the other person, blaming them. No, what is it saying about me? That's the only plausible route once you read the story. I tell you why that's necessary, folks. I'll start off with the negative. How many of you are not gardeners? Put up your hand. Come on. How many of you are not interested in gardening? Oh, you poor souls. Please come forward for prayer at the end of the service, and I'll pray for you for deliverance, okay? Okay, we like gardening, right? Hazel and I have always liked gardening. How do you deal with weeds? Chop them at the surface, and what happens a week later? Whoops, regrown, back again. How many of you have pulled out a dandelion in your life? Do you know how deep their roots are? So break it, pull it out, and it'll just regrow. And that's the same for you and I. If we don't deal with the roots in our lives, the same thing will keep regrowing again and again and again. And so, folks, I believe that God, in order to bring us freedom, will allow pressure, conflict, circumstances to come our way, not to shame us, but to heal us. And the real problem is not what's happening to us, but how are we responding? So how do we move? This is the last part, okay? How do we move from seeing ourselves as a victim to moving to the place where we can have victory in our lives? This story, I believe, is a loving but very firm challenge. To accept that God may be saying in our circumstances that He's not allowing these things to wreck and destroy, but to bring something out of us that we need to face and deal with. And so I think the first step towards freedom and healing is to stop seeing yourself as a victim and start looking at you, not other people. There are 3 questions we must all ask in every situation we face. And I hope you'll remember these and remember them for each situation you face. Number 1, what is the situation triggering in me? What is it triggering? What is my reaction? Okay, what is it? Insecurity? Fear? What is it triggering in me? Label it, name it. Number 2, what behavior is showing up repeatedly in my life? Look at your track record. What is the consistent behavioral pattern that you see happening again and again and again in your life? And thirdly, what root might be feeding that? So folks, I'll throw some ideas out, all right? These are all roots in our lives that can be triggers, and these circumstances can be triggering them. And when they come to the surface, these are the things that we have to deal with. Control issues. Where does control come from? Insecurity. Do you know it's instinctive in human nature that when anything shakes, like if there was an earthquake, when anything shakes, we reach out our hands to try and grab it to stabilize things. And if we've ever had an insecure past, we can easily have control issues because we're intent on keeping our world safe and stable. So we control it. The problem is, the big question is, there can only be one person in control. It's either you or God. We have to choose. What about pride? Everyone else is always at fault, never you. Critical, fault-finding, show contempt for other people. What about rebellion? You've had bad experiences with authority figures, and there's no ways you're going to submit to any authority. What about a root of feeling rejected, unloved, worthless, useless? Bitterness? Unforgiveness because you've been hurt badly? What about past failure? Shame? Guilt? What about things we've been involved in that we should never have been involved in, that we've never severed ties with? Occultic practices somewhere in our lives. A lot of these things can be triggering the problems in our lives. So folks, just two things for all of us to remember, okay? God doesn't expose things to humiliate us. He exposes them so that they can be faced and dealt with. And I think from the story of Sion, we have to remember this one key issue. God never brings something out that he doesn't have the capacity to have victory over, right? They defeated Sion. And it is within us, with God, to conquer these things which are a problem in our lives. Unfortunately today, I can only just skim over the general ideas. There's no ways we can speak individually about how to have victory in those things. But folks, like the songs we sang today, okay, all of the Bible, all of God's heart is to help you and I find victory in our lives. So folks, can we change the footnotes that we use for life? Okay? Blaming others may feel protective, it may feel like you're doing the right thing, but the problem is, as long as you see yourself as a victim and you blame other people, you never own the problem and you never change. Facing ourselves can feel very uncomfortable sometimes because it removes excuses for our behavior. See, as long as I can be a victim and blame you, that means I don't have to face myself. You're at fault, I'm exempt from looking at my own behavior. The moment you stop doing that, you are responsible for your behavior. But you see, what that does is, picture this, folks. Let's imagine that you lot have really treated me badly and I resent you. You have control over me now. You have power over my life. The moment I take that power away from you and say, right, I will take full responsibility for my own behavior, I'm now in control, not you. So by taking responsibility for your life, the power and control comes back to you, not other people. So suddenly you find the freedom to say, you can behave any way you like. I'll make my own choices for my own life, thank you. True? True? Yes. I don't mind starting at the beginning. It's true. I'm not going to let you determine how I behave. I will choose to behave the right way, and you will have no control over me. Correct? And you see, the moment control is back in your hands, change is possible, freedom is possible. When we own our behavior, when we own our problems, strength is found there. Facing ourselves brings freedom. Dealing with us brings freedom. Amen. Not easy. But it's the only way we can truly change and grow and overcome. Amen. I'm going to ask our worship team to come up. Folks, we're going to just have a last song here. And I'm going to come up and do notices after that. But see while we have this opportunity to worship again, can I encourage you for your own life? Would you make a decision today regarding what I've said? These are the kind of things that you can do, all right? Number one, Like Israel, who is promised a land of freedom, you have to commit. You have to be all in. You have got to make a decision to serve God in your life. And you've got to be all in. I did that on the 17th of November, 1985. I responded formally in a service, came to the front, and I prayed a prayer of commitment. I'm going to be in here. You need to have that decisive day in your life when you decide you're in. If you've not done that, please come to me after the service. I'd like to pray with you. So that's one thing for you to consider. The second thing to consider is, if you need to change the footnotes in your life while we are singing, just say a prayer to God. Acknowledge what you need to acknowledge based on what we've spoken about today, and make a resolution in your own heart and mind for life moving forward from here. Just do that with yourself, between you and God. Okay? Let's be honest with God today. To call on Him if we need help. And then I'll come back and finish off with notices. Okay? All good? All right, let's stand up and sing.